Fire Emblem Engage has recently announced that they will be returning the Turnwheel Mechanic introduced in Fire Emblem Echoes: Shadows of Valentia. With the push of a button, this mechanic allows the player to go back to a previous player action for a complete redo. This puts the player in scenarios where if they get bad RNG, an accidental misinput, or ended up getting one of their units killed, they can return to a previous point to before that happened to redo that action. The Turnwheel has, in my experience, been a divisive topic for obvious reasons. On one hand, this mechanic's innate forgiving nature gives accessibility to those new to the series and gives them multiple chances to correct and learn from their mistakes. It also is a direct answer to really bad RNG rolls mid to late in a chapter that cause a unit death or an unfavorable position beyond your control. It started in Echoes, and you can understand why this mechanic started here. The simple answer is that the devs wanted to make Fire Emblem easier, which, yeah, it's a lot more forgiving, but for this game specifically. Gaiden/Echoes RNG was brutal at times. RNG in terrain in Gaiden was notoriously unforgiving, hit rates were greatly affected by terrain, and a lot of terrain in Echoes was hard to traverse through, making enemies standing on terrain tiles and getting massive avoid boosts especially scary, and map progression at times frustrating and hard, all the while also having a small cast of characters. But Echoes also had dungeon battles with unpredictable amounts of monsters to face, and giving the player a safe way to not get screwed over deep into a dungeon exploration was a good idea. There was just unfair bullshit in this game because Gaiden had unfair bullshit too. A mechanic like this in Three Houses is actually vital for the game. I'm not about to argue that Three Houses had the most important cast in the series because I don't fucking remember every unit in the series ever, but Three Houses' cast intrinsically was very important. In a game with virtually the entire, comparatively smaller cast being recruitable by the mid-game, you are spending your entire campaign growing a unit's stats, abilities, talents, learned abilities and arts, supports, battalion rank, and so on. Every one of your core units will have been highly invested through your limited resources of instructor, exploration, and activity points. Losing one of your actual irreplaceable units in the late game has more amplified negative consequences than in past entries. There are a lot more variables making a Three Houses unit unique compared to a simple variation in weapon rank, bases, and growths of an older entry. For example, if you lost Urk, Guy, or Lucius in Blazing Sword, you have late-game replacements that function incredibly similar to them in Pent, Corel, and Renault, and an actual Goto archetype in Athos. Three Houses didn't have child units either, contributing to the cast being so small. The appreciation I have for child units, specifically in Fates, is that not only are you investing in pairing up two units together for a child with inherited skills, but once they arrive, they come with the offspring seal to immediately catch them up with the rest of the cast. You're given a unit completely for free that has up-to-date skills and stats. It's basically like recruiting a new unit from older games who are innately capable of replacing their parents if they fell during the campaign. Fates also had capturing, and some bosses were just really good. You just don't have that insurance in Three Houses to that extent. You also couldn't grind levels infinitely like in Awakening or Echoes. If you could, then the weight of losing a cast member in Three Houses would decrease in severity because you could just grind up another unit instead. You may have benched Catherine or Petra and just kept using Felix, but if Felix somehow died, Catherine or Petra with enough time could fulfill Felix's role eventually. But say on maddening mode, if you're deep into Azure Moon and Felix is dead, you literally do not have the resources to replace a unit you invested quite literally the entire campaign in. Three Houses gives a lot more creativity and potential growth for its cast members, but in return, it is a lot more punishing to decide to let a unit die. And so, the Turnwheel fixes that issue and essentially invalidates Permadeath, a series staple, as a valid option. For this reason, it's understandable that Three Houses has a mechanic like this. It ensures you keep your highly invested unit alive and doesn't let the myriad of points of all kinds go to waste. And through this perspective and understanding of why Three Houses and Divine Pulse is built for each other, you can start to understand why Engage's Time Crystal is a thing. Engage is set to be a game with virtually the entire comparatively smaller cast being recruitable by the mid-game. You are spending your entire campaign growing a unit's stats, abilities, emblem, bond effects, and bond supports, actual supports, training points, cafe uses, and so on. This game doesn't quite seem as intense on the growth front. There is no instructor mechanic, for example, and there is seemingly infinite level grinding, like in Awakening, but the spirit of the game is very similar. Intelligent Systems doesn't want you to lose all the progress you made with the unit you've invested so much time, effort, and resources in. On the other, more negative hand, this mechanic has a high tendency to greatly remove the strategic depth Fire Emblem famously has by removing risk entirely. Why bother thinking strategically if this YOLO 45% axe hit may miss and kill your unit if you can just give it a test, turn back time if it misses, and try something else? It's a tool for convenience, but in its current state, it is a broken mechanic that now, with the third new Fire Emblem entry in a row, has become a staple in the series. But is it such a broken mechanic if it's on the player to make use of it? In other words, if you don't like it, why don't you just not use it? Well, there's a couple big reasons why, despite my dislike for the mechanic in concept and in practice, I still use it anyway. First of all, it's a resource. In a strategy game with resources of all kinds, from items, gold, units, and so on, not using your strongest resource you have for the sake of a challenge is just annoying, and in my opinion, isn't in the spirit of the game's design. Basically, having to actively avoid resources in a game that is constantly encouraging me to utilize every resource is not really a compelling idea to me. I also don't think that just reducing its use from over 9 uses to like 4 max solves the inherent problem with it. Sure, with limited uses, your margin of error decreases noticeably. You have less chances to mess up or get unlucky, but it's more of a band-aid solution in my opinion, because the core issue is that the turn wheel, as it is right now, has no punishment for using it, and even the option of burning the uses will always be more viable than leaving a unit dead. Every version of the turn wheel in its current states invalidates Fire Emblem's unique strategy role-playing game gimmick of when your unit dies, it's gone forever. Nobody wants to lose a unit they invested their time into, and Fire Emblem is definitely aware that fear of missing out about losing a good unit is real. This shit used to be an advertising crutch for the series, so the question is, how do we get the best of both worlds? Can we put value in permadeath again? Can we have a turnwheel mechanic while adding stakes? Yeah, and technically, the turnwheel has existed in series past. The Turnwheel Mechanic is a progression of mid-chapter saving that Fire Emblem has already used. It wasn't so literal as like turning back a turnwheel or employing the use of a goddess that lives inside your head to reverse the flow of time, but yes, save mechanics have existed in Fire Emblem before, starting with Genealogy of the Holy War in fact. In that game, you could save at the beginning of each turn. You could do this forever, every turn, no punishment, nada. Which sounds broken, right? Make a mistake, poof. Just reset and try again and again and again. It makes sense that a mechanic like this would exist in this game. Each map, except for the prologue, was 64 tiles wide and 64 tiles high, and often chapter progression was going from point A to point B to point C, sometimes going back to point B, then to point D. The chapters were long, with consequences getting more and more difficult and dire as you went deeper and deeper into a chapter. While reasonable and even great from an accessibility perspective, similar trivializing exploits were possible with this system. You could save scum, a community-used expression which is defined as exploiting the save system to keep rerolling RNG for a favorable outcome, be it good RNG on arena runs or good level ups. FE4 was still engaging though. Being given the opportunity to restart your turn is great, but it's not on the same level as the turnwheel style, as some mistakes, no matter how often you reset said turn, be it a unit death from bad placement or a failed time-based chapter goal like saving villages or something. But overall, it's still very strong and has no limitation. Is there a real catch to this? Is this not just another broken way of turning back time? Yes, but also no. Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776 and FE6 and FE7 had a ranked mode, and we're going to focus on Genealogy's rank mode for the sake of this video. In FE4, there were 4 ranks. Experience rank, determined by the total number of level ups. Tactics rank, determined by the total number of turns used to complete the game. Your rank dropped by 1 for each player-controlled castle that was destroyed. Survival rank. A rank was earned if everyone on the team survived / no recruitable character was missed. Character deaths can be reversed with the Valkyrie Staff, a single-use repairable staff which revives a fallen ally. Revived allies won't count as a strike against this rank. And combat rank. A rank is received if 3 or less units have died throughout the game, which may sound the same as survival, but the only way to undo a strike against your rank here is to reset the entire chapter. The core difference between survival and combat is that survival is only concerned with who is alive or dead at the end of the campaign, and the Valkyrie Staff, which could be repaired for 30,000 gold, can fix the rank to A by repeated use. Combat, however, is a more specific look at your own performance in the overall game, since it ranks you based on the total number of unit deaths recorded. It will not be influenced by the Valkyrie staff and is more of a test of your skill if you managed to beat the game with as few unit deaths logged as possible, period. In practice, this means that if, for example, Leaf, Ares, Finn, and Nana died in the campaign, but you revived each one of them before the end of the game, you would get an A in survival, but B in combat, essentially acting as a check that you didn't cheese your overall ranking, the average of all 4 rankings, to get an A rank overall run. On the other hand, if all 4 of those units died, but you completely restarted the chapter and they survived the second time, you would get an A rank in combat as well. That all said, the real value of the ranking system lies here. Because overall ranking is the average of all 4 ranks, sometimes you don't need to restart a chapter at all. You actually could afford to let your units stay dead, crazy concept, I know, and have their loss recorded while assuring an overall ranking of A. How? So long as you revive your units by the end of the run, and if you have an A rank in experience and tactics already, you have 3 A ranks and 1 B rank for an overall ranking of A. So, congratulations, you let your units stay dead and played within the rankings rules and still came out on top. And you get rewarded for this with a secret cutscene. Good job, player. Even when playing ranked, you can still save scum as much as you want, but the cleverness behind this condition is that you are discouraged from turn resetting for a unit's survival's sake, and instead encouraged to rationalize your unit deaths with the Valkyrie staff by not resetting, not reloading, and pushing forward. It's simple, makes you think about your play and unit death differently, and is what separates a ranked run from a normal run, despite the same game being played. The Nintendo DS games had, in my opinion, the best form of mid-chapter saving in the series thus far: save points. As the name implies, these were tiles on the map that were placed ahead of time to serve as checkpoints to save progress. The reason why I am partial to this form of mid-chapter saving is that unlike any other form, including the modern Turnwheel, there is a lot less agency given to the player. Instead of having maximum control of where and when you want to save, it is up to the map designer to determine where you ought to save your progress, not the player. And as someone who has a knack for map design, my perspective is that the player already has a lot of strength over the enemy. Choosing when and where to save progress, or having the ability to restart a turn or action whenever they want, is way too much power. Circling to the Turnwheel again, it's clear that having this much power in the player's hands is completely unfair, something that Fire Emblem Engage's most recent trailer even admitted to.
敵軍にはちょっと気の毒ですが、初心者には心強い機能です。
This mechanic was designed primarily as a workaround to permadeath and the fear of losing a unit's progress. Making an accessibility feature like this does have a place in modern Fire Emblem, but in my opinion, its implementation is lackluster. With all of this information presented, there are several things that Engage could do to add value to permadeath again. Number 1. Yes, you could reduce the uses of the crystal, because technically it does add value to deciding to restart a chapter entirely or leaving a unit dead by virtue of it being closer to an inevitability from the start. Number 2, make Engage's cast bigger. Whether it's strong pre-promote units in the late game acting as bad RNG/bad decision insurance, or, and I say this completely seriously, bring back child units. Create an awakening-styled story justification, why not at this point, seriously, to add a ton of replayability, depth, and flexibility to your game. Permadeath becomes more viable if you actually have child units with an offspring seal ready to roll. And number 3, revisit FE4's ranked mode. If the Turnwheel or any other kind of rewind mechanic in the series was primarily used to prevent unit loss, just have the game remember it unless the player decides to completely restart the map. As it is right now, you're a cat with 9 lives. You would of course need a Valkyrie Staff of Yggdrasil or a Revival Fountain of Guidance/Echoes to make this choice more appealing, but you get the idea. The thing is, while an easy answer is just don't use the Turnwheel, it misses the point of the argument. The Turnwheel is a good idea. Being able to reset bad situations beyond your best attempts to mitigate bad RNG sucks, but it's proven that you can have the best of both worlds through a precedent that exists in the series already. Ranked runs are hard and stressful, but without them, mechanics like FE4 saving, Radiant Dawn's battle saves, or the modern Turnwheel has absolutely no way to punish the player for acting stupid in a strategy game. I doubt Engage will provide any nuance to this mechanic, but I will be happy if they do. If it were up to me, I would return to the DS remakes and include a ranked mode. Save points to remove agency from an already stacked human, and a ranked mode which discourages abuse of the save system, or the checkmark system, or the Turnwheel Mechanic, or anything like that. As a bonus, keep 3 houses level up RNG seeding so you can't even save scum for better level ups. Like I mentioned, the Turnwheel / mid-chapter saving and rewinding are good ideas for modern Fire Emblem. Whether you prefer the Turnwheel or save points, the formula is missing an accountability check that the series used to have, and consequently has made the games way too forgiving for sloppy play. Hopefully Engage remembers this, and whatever chapter ranking they've implemented takes into account rewinds.